Okay, so thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you to the organizer for having our paper here. I mean, being a great admirer of the French educational system, having the opportunity to present at École Normale Supérieure is kind of a dream, so I'm especially delighted about that. And I should have a disclaimer. The disclaimer is, I mean, for those of you who know me, I've devoted like the last 10 years of my life building complicated heterogeneous agents model, often in continuous time, with deep learning, I mean, things. So if you were expecting a paper in that line, you are going to be very disappointed. This is the first paper that I've written in my life that my wife is interested about, that my 7-year-old kid can talk to me about the paper and provide me good insights. So I hope so. For all of you, if there is any person, I mean, within the papers of this conference, it is simpler to understand. That I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but if any of you don't get absolutely anything that I tell, come to me after the talk and tell me. It's because I haven't explained it, because there is no double side in this. I mean, it's extremely simple. Actually, with any high school student could have written this paper conditional on having access to 7 million bank deposits. But conditional on that, it is perfectly possible. So that's the main disclaimer. What? Yeah, there is also an interesting story about the 7 economies, but that I can also tell about in the coffee break, okay? So, I mean, you see, these things matter. So what is this paper about? This paper tried to answer, in a way, the question that Anton Nakov made yesterday about why people care about inflation. Which are the costs of inflation? In reality and in the models. And then the issue is that inflation matters. I like those quotes. One is by Bernanke. I'm a big fan of Bernanke, and he said, okay, inflation, unemployment, the people who mainly care about unemployment is the one who get unemployed. Whereas in inflation, everyone cares about inflation. It's very social, because everyone has to go to the supermarket and purchase things. So you cannot get away from inflation. But then, who suffers from inflation? And here things, I mean, that is like economics 101. I mean, it's the first thing. I'm not an economist by education, so I always have this kind of naive approach to some standard things that probably people who have been exposed to them when they were 18 years old, they take them for granted. So which are the costs of inflation? And then there was this curious thing, because in the same day, I mean, some months ago, when we decided, when I got with the idea of the paper, I read, with a difference of 5 minutes, one ECB board member saying, look, we really care about inflation because inflation hurts disproportionately the poor. Why? Because the poor, as everyone knows, consume more food and energy. And hence, food and energy prices are going up a lot. It's the poor who are the most exposed to that. Okay, said, okay, so it's the poor who suffer because of that. And then immediately I opened Twitter, and there was Paul Krugman saying, it's the rich who suffer from inflation, because as everyone knows, the rich hold a lot of nominal assets. They have deposits, they have cash, they have bank accounts, bonds, and essentially inflation redistributes wealth from the rich to the poor. So it's the rich who suffer disproportionately from inflation. I said, I mean, that's strange. So what do you do when you have a doubt? You open Macroeconomics book. And then I went to Macroeconomics book. I borrowed from the library of the Bank of Spain. And it devotes a small chapter to the cost of inflation for household. And essentially, it says 2 things. First, again, unexpected inflation arbitrarily redistributes wealth among individuals. So, okay, so it's Krugman who is right. It's the redistributive issues matter. And then unanticipated inflation also hurts individuals on fixed pensions. There was no issue about the consumption baskets and so on. So I said, okay, maybe it's worth to have a look to that, because, I mean, there are issues that are not covered with that. So then let me put all this in a kind of more structured way. So the first channel is what is widely known as the Fisher channel. Inflation redistributes redistributes nominal wealth in real terms from lenders to borrowers by changing the value of assets. This is widely new. The first paper that I'm aware is the Debken, Snyder, JP paper. Then there was a number of papers written by people in this room. There is even a couple of papers by Cesarme that I was unaware until yesterday. And people keep on writing them. I mean, Palotti is a PhD student from UCL, a student of Morten Raben, who is this year in the market, who have revisited again, every time using new data sets, this Fisherian channel. Fine, I mean, this, I guess everyone, I mean, I will talk more about that with examples about the Fisherian channel. The second channel, the one about, in Mankiw, the one about fixed pensions, in fact, if you think about that, it's wider than that, because it's not only pensions that is fixed. I mean, I don't know you, but my employer doesn't update my wage every month according to inflation, so I don't get real wages, I get nominal wages. Wages are typically updated sparsely in most advanced economy. Actually, there is a number of papers, one by Ervele, Bihan, and co-authors, so there are papers for Europe, for the US, that essentially conclude that the wages are sticky, surprise, surprise, typically very similar to this kind of Taylor model. So there is a staggered wage contract. So that, and typically, again, I'm gonna really enlighten you, salaries are updated on an annual basis. So people typically get their wage updated once per year. So if your wage was updated last October until next October, it's not going to be updated, no matter the inflation level that you are experiencing. The same happens with pension, and the same happens with unemployment benefits. So here, this is kind of a more general channel that we call nominal income channel. So income, I mean, especially labor income, is sticky, and hence, inflation reduces. And here there is no redistributive in the sense, I mean, it damages people. I mean, the higher your income is, the more likely it is that you are gonna lose purchasing power due to inflation. So those are the two channels in Mankiw's textbook. But then there is a third channel. This third channel is receiving a lot of attention nowadays. This, from an academic perspective, I think that Xavier Jarabel is the most popular preacher of this kind of things, which is called inflation inequality. People don't consume the CPI basket. No one consumes the CPI basket. The CPI basket is based on the mean consumer, but in reality, on the average consumer, but in reality, people consume different baskets depending on their income, depending on their age, depending on several factors. But then, if you consume more or less, I mean, if inflation is heterogeneous across sectors, depending on your consumption basket, you will experience more or less inflation. So then we have these three channels. But these three channels tell you different things about who wins and who loses from inflation. So is there a way to think about the three channels in a structured way? And this is what we try to do in this paper. So the aim is extremely simple, yes?
Should we expect it to be extremely different depending on the type of inflation or not? I mean, it seems like it's a first order effect, right? Like
so for channel 1 and 2, that is for the Fisher and the nominal channel, it doesn't matter in the sense that what you care is about the index, the aggregate CPI. For channel 3, yes, because it's not the same if you have, I mean, if all the goods increase their price by the same amount, that channel disappears. If you have this kind of energy inflation, it is pretty different if you have some kind of service inflation in which what is increasing is the price of restaurants, for instance.
You have to distinguish between changes in relative prices and changes in inflation. If inflation doesn't change relative prices,
exactly.
That is going to even out
exactly.
sooner or later.
That's it. If there are no changes in relative prices, this channel doesn't exist. That is the case. So what do we do here? First, we derive an analytical formula. capturing the impact of inflation, and I will be more precise about what is the impact of inflation. I mean, I'm talking about surprise temporary inflation, okay? But essentially, we mimic the Auclair job market paper. So this is Auclair AR. Auclair does a lot of things, but at the basis of what he does, there is this approach. Auclair does it for a monetary policy shock. We do it for an inflation shock. I mean, Auclair has an inflation shock lurking there, and he has this Fisherian channel, but then misses the other channels. But our approach is literally the one of Auclair. And then this analytical formula allows us to identify these three channels, okay? That is nice. And then what we do is we go to the data. We go to Spanish data, both to public surveys with tens of thousands of households, but 10 of thousands of households was not enough for us. So then we managed to get this proprietary data from BBVA, in which we have all the clients of BBVA in Spain, with all their bank accounts, credit cards, debit cards, bill payment, and then we also do this kind of accounting over their system. And we get pretty similar results, both with surveys and with hard banking data, okay? What do we find? First, the analytical formula. I mean, I will talk more about that, but essentially the analytical formula allows to analyze how the increase, I mean, it's this kind of sufficient statistic things that is so fashionable nowadays. So essentially, it allows to understand the impact of surprise inflation on wealth through a Fisher channel that is linked to this nominal position, a nominal income channel, which is linked to your nominal labor income, pension and employment benefits, and this relative consumption channel, which is the more original, which links this concept of individual inflation over, aggregate inflation and your consumption and your nominal consumption, okay? So, and then we take it to the data. And then take it to the data. This is holding, no, I mean, this is precisely the effect that it has on your, so this is...
when there is inflation, my wage might increase to compensate, right? So
yeah, but this is not captured. This is precisely, so your wage may be increased. This is not captured.
This is the impact of inflation on somebody whose costs increase because of inflation, but whose revenues do not increase.
Let me defer the answer 5 slides, because there will be 4 slides devoted precisely to answer that question. So if not, I will ask you. I will say it is clear now. So let me defer the answer 5 slides.
It was a simple question.
Exactly. But let me, so there are many things here that are unclear. So let me, I hope they will be clear
there's another question.
But this is actually related to my first question. It's a very different thing if on the country as a whole you're losing wealth because you're transferring money to oil producers or whatnot, or if this is going to show up in someone's wealth or not. And it looks like this is really a first order effect to know whether on the aggregate you're losing something.
That like, I don't...
do you think it's imported inflation, or is it inflation?
So from the point of view of a household, I mean, if I tell you that potatoes are 10% more expensive, what does the difference make to you that they are more expensive because there has been a crop problem in France or because there is a war in Argentina?
Well, because some household is going to be a producer of this.
Okay. But then So now I get. We don't talk here about general equilibrium effect. So I don't talk here about the effect of inflation on the economy and how it affects wages or how it affects monetary policy and hence it affects. So there are no this is like Auclair. There are no general equilibrium effects here. This is purely direct effects, partial equilibrium about how inflation affects you directly. There is not the point of how inflation affects the monetary policy, fiscal policy, the productive, all these channels, which for sure are very relevant, maybe even more relevant, are not present here. This is just the purely direct effect of inflation.
The
Sorry?
I think François was talking about direct effects only. Yeah.
No.
That's not
Increasing energy price, a fraction goes to the rest of the distribution. So somewhere in the economy, that's not going to show up there.
Any redistribution to relative price will show up for some household relative to other households. So you don't need the general equilibrium. He is worried about the portion that goes abroad, but anything that is inside will go through other.
Let's take the case of.
Exactly.
Sorry?
It should be in an NNP position. Like we attributed firm ownership and NNP positions in firms to households according to ownership of shares and so on.
Yeah, but shares are real. So
Well, no, shares are real, but firms are leveraged.
yeah, I mean, but again, this is general equilibrium. So you are talking.
No, this is direct effect. This is not general equilibrium. This is just direct effect. Yeah.
So
Someone's within the economy, one's nominal liability is others' nominal assets, unless it goes abroad. So there is this redistribution channel.
No, I mean, so let me. I still think that this is so. If what I understand is that you tell me there is an energy shock, and this energy shock is favoring EDF, let's put it in this situation, and therefore this is favoring EDF shareholders because the amount of the shares increases, and therefore they are benefiting for that. I see that as a general equilibrium effect, not as a partial equilibrium effect. The same as if you tell me this is the increase in the price of potatoes is increasing potato firms, and that's increasing the real wage of potato workers. I mean,
Why is it not on your right-hand side? Maybe it's a question. Why are there only minus signs on your right-hand side?
No, but there are minus. That will be again clear when I saw it. But these objects, some of these objects can be positive or negative. So you have minus signs, but the net nominal position can be positive.
For example, suppose there is a wage push by unions, okay, which is inflationary. Then your minus WJ will be positive. Is that in your accounting? Am I correct?
No, because this is the nominal. This is not the increase in the nominal income. This is the nominal.
Right.
Income.
So it is the change in wealth of a fictitious household whose nominal revenues are held constant.
Yes.
That was my question.
Yes, I will. But again, give me 5 slides to talk about.
But in reality, your unionized household is going to become
compensated,
better off, not worse off, because of the inflation.
Yes.
And this is not a matter of general equilibrium. That's what they said. It's just a matter of accounting, right?
But this is not because of inflation. I mean, that.
No, it is because of inflation. The inflation benefits the people who originate the cost push. I guess we are all saying the same thing here. Yeah.
Okay, let me friend, then we can talk more about that in the sense because I mean I disagree with that view, but let me skip it. So let me just tell you about the results, but very quick. I will skip the result. You will see the result later. Let's jump into the analytical framework because I think what is clear. I mean, this is just a matter of definition. So the price level.
Can I ask one more question,
Yes.
taking the privilege of the chair? In principle, are you after the change, the change in discounted consumption of an individual in your data set from a change in today's inflation? Is that what you kind of after?
The change in your.
The change in discounted consumption or something like that?
No. Is this not about consumption? That would be the next step. This is what Auclair does. So Auclair, essentially, what I do is literally. So it's nice. I mean, those criticisms are nice, but you should write a comment to the AR about Auclair's paper because essentially what Auclair does is exactly the same. You have this kind of partial equilibrium effect in which Auclair analyzes monetary policy. So essentially, what he considers is a monetary policy shock has effect on real rates and on inflation. Those effects affect the wealth of an individual. This is what I do, exactly. There is an increment in the wealth of an individual. And then if you have the wealth of the individual, given the MPC, the marginal propensity to consume, the marginal propensity to save, whatever, you can move to consumption, to the impact that that has on an agent consumption. We don't make that jump. So we don't talk about consumption. We just talk about imputed wealth.
So you wanted to have the change on real wealth, which would be the consumption basket that the individual could afford at today's prices.
Exactly. So
that the fact that much of the nominal wealth is spent in the future and will depend on future prices, etc., that is not taken into account.
Yeah. Give me 4 slides, and then I promise I will devote 10 minutes to this, to what are we computing exactly. So let me just to put some definitions. So this is the aggregate price level. It's just given some weights. And where do those weights come from? Those weights come from the basket of the average consumer. So then the statistical institute build the basket of an average consumer, and based on that, it produces the consumer price index. Then you have the sectoral inflation and the aggregate inflation, okay? If there are no changes in relative prices, then they would coincide, but in general, they are different. So these are just definitions. Let me just talk about wealth, okay? So the net wealth of an individual is just, it includes both the nominal and the real wealth. So it's the amount of cash that you have, of nominal instruments that you have, deposits at bonds at market prices. So this is D and Q. So then there is real wealth. So you have houses, you have shares. This is S, okay? And this, again, has some market price. And then you have also some nominal debt. You have consumer credit, or you have mortgages. Okay, so this is the total wealth of a person. I mean, if we are missing something, please let us know. This is the total wealth of a person. At time t is that. So this is our definition of wealth. Okay. Now there is a budget constraint. The budget constraint is that what happens from time t to time t plus 1. Yes? Sorry?
In a sense, real assets are nominal. Actually, the asset prices of equity and so on are nominal, right? So when there's inflation, yes, to an extent they are a hedge against inflation because they have a real underlying asset, but the price is nominal and might not scale with inflation as well, right? 1-to-1.
I mean, that I don't know. With that, I don't know what to say. I mean, my assumption is that in a real asset is a real asset. If you tell me that it is not, maybe it is right. I mean, I cannot tell you. But I mean, let me put you. I have now I'm purchased a second house. So I have a house that I'm gonna rent. If rent prices increase, I mean, if inflation, if the component of inflation associated to rent increase by 10%, I hope that my rent will increase by 10%. Maybe it's not the case. And then the issue about whether my house price will increase as inflation or not, that my assumption it is that it should. If it is not, then the real price is going down. But then I don't know. I mean, that's an interesting topic to say whether real assets are really real or there is some nominal stickiness with real assets, both stocks and houses. My assumption is that real assets are real, but maybe it is not. That I agree. So the budget constraints of the household, I mean, the change in wealth from one period to the other captures the different channels. I mean, cash stays the same in nominal terms. Then the nominal assets, you have some capital gains and some nominal rates. And then for the case of real assets, you have some capital gains. And then you have an increase that I assume that is a real increase, irrespective of inflation, and then the nominal increase, okay? And the same with debts. And then you have some consumption basket. And this is your consumption basket. And your consumption basket depends on what you consume, okay? So now, what do consider an inflation shock? So we do exactly I mean, conceptually, what Auclair does, which is we consider a one period surprise and temporary shock. By one period surprise and temporary shock means that asset prices at time t do not reflect that inflation because people were not expecting that inflation. But then at the end of the period, asset prices do not reflect that inflation because people do not expect that inflation to last anymore. So inflation does not affect asset prices. That you might think whether it is practical or not, but this is essentially Auclair's framework. Auclair's framework is this temporary surprise inflation. Then we can discuss whether it fits or not to the data.
So this assumption of one period, do you also consider whether the inflation is going to last, let's say for 5 periods? Because
no, I mean, it's relatively easy to do it. So we could have, we have not done it, but I mean, it's not made complicated. But then you need to start, like in the, for instance, in the Debka and Snyder paper, making scenarios about the evolution of inflation. But then you also need to start making scenarios about the evolution of nominal rates. Like, is monetary policy gonna reflect inflation? So then, I mean, it can be done. So there is no particularly
but
difficulty.
I think that's important, no? Because if you want to think about the inflation episode in particular now, you may expect that in terms of expectation, there's going to be some pricing in back
now,
on
yes.
the bonds. So that's kind of
now, yes. In 2021, no. So this is why and that affects for the empirical. So from conceptually, you are totally right. So conceptually, what we present can be trivially extended to multi-period without major issue. From an empirical point of view, you are totally right. Results depend a lot on this kind of things. So for that affects the particular episode that can be selected to analyze, and we could not be applied now because now, I mean, the courts are really discounting this inflation, which was not the case in 2021. I will devote a couple of slides to that. So then we come to the equation, and now is the time in this and the next slide to collect all the question and to discuss about what is it. So what we are analyzing here is the first order change in nominal wealth expressed in real terms to a transitory inflation shock. So then we are not analyzing general equilibrium effects. So we are not analyzing how, I mean, regarding to the question which are the underlying causes of inflation and how these underlying causes of inflation can affect real wages or stock returns. These kind of things we are not taking into account. That really requires general equilibrium analysis. Because I mean, if I tell you, because you really need to look at from the point of view of the household, you just see inflation. So you don't see where does this inflation come from. You just see the inflation that you are facing. So this is just the same as in Auclair. This is just the direct effect of inflation. There are no indirect effects of inflation. Inflation has many indirect effects. Some of them are redistributionary, others are not. But here we just care about the direct effect. And the direct effect has the net nominal position. This is already in Auclair and in Dobkin and Snyder and in many of the papers that we have covered. Then there is, again, this nominal income channel. And then there is this relative consumption channel. I mean, the net nominal position here is just the market value today of cash, nominal assets minus nominal liabilities, and that was the net nominal position. So, okay. So then let me. So just two definition again. One about the consumption of the agent, and then about individual inflation. So individual inflation is just you can construct an inflation, a price index and an inflation index for an agent. I mean, looking at the increase in sectoral prices, but looking at the consumption basket of every person. So I can tell you which is your personal inflation. Actually, if you get into the Financial Times webpage, you can check which is your inflation. So that is simple to do. But now let me go to an example in order to illustrate what do we mean by each of these channels. So imagine an economy composed by two goods, okay? You have fuel and and books, okay? Fuel experience a 10% increase and books at 0%. So the average inflation, and I mean, the basket of the representative consumer is half and half. So you have a 5% inflation. So now let's gonna take this person, Anna. Anna is making 30,000 euros per year. And she has a 60,000 euro mortgage and a 10,000 euros in deposits. And she spends every year 20,000 euros in books and nothing on fuel. So what is the net nominal position? The net nominal position of this person is minus 50,000. So then, if you have a 5% inflation, then there are 2,500 euros would be the impact of this surprise inflation on its net nominal position. What is the interpretation of that? So the interpretation of that, because this is something that, I mean, talking to people, the kind of question that people in the street make are different to the ones that you were making, but they are no less interesting. So people say, but how can it be that if the salary of this person is not increased, having a net nominal position accounts for a positive gain? I can illustrate that with an example. Imagine that you take this money, again, and you invest it in a house. So the house is paying you a nominal, a rent. If rent prices increase with CPI, as it is the case in most countries, including Spain, automatically in contracts, rents increase with CPI, automatically the rent that you collect are going to increase with CPI. Whereas the mortgage that you owe for this house to the bank is not increases. So every month you are making more money.
Shouldn't you put that in the nominal income?
What?
These imputed rents.
No. I mean, this is the net nominal income is the value of your nominal assets. Period. It's not about the flow of profit. The flow of profits come here. So when you have a nominal asset, or when you have a real asset, would be in that case, a real asset is paying you some real return plus inflation. So this is where it is captured, not in the one thing is the income flow and the other is the stock of wealth. So I hope the Fisher channel is more or less clear. I mean, for economists it's the less contentious, but for people in the street is the most complicated one. So inflation redistributes that way. It just depends on which is your net nominal position. As César put it, in reality, it's much more complicated because it not only matters on actual inflation, but it also matters on the whole expected path of inflation because it affects asset prices. But we are killing that channel by assuming this temporary inflation.
I mean, if what you are saying doesn't leave a message for welfare, then the analysis is useful, right?
So that's your opinion.
No. The only reason why we should care about this is if that redistribution has welfare consequences. Now, it is extremely partial equilibrium intertemporally in the following sense, that in the case of the book, for example, the household that you mentioned spends everything in books. But if inflation doesn't change the relative price of books, a bank would be more than willing to finance that situation, because tomorrow the price of book is going to go down and the price of whatever it was, food, is going to go up because the relative price didn't change. So from a point of view, it's not only partial equilibrium statically, but also dynamically.
No, I don't understand what you... So you have introduced two different concepts. One, welfare, and the other, funding by banks.
Yes.
I don't see how they are connected.
Well, they are connected because if relative price, unless inflation has effects on relative prices, then you are talking about relative prices. You are not talking about inflation.
But I haven't talked about relative prices yet. So with the Fisherian channel, there is nothing related about...
Sorry.
So
if the price of books goes up and the price of food doesn't go up, yes, that is a change in relative price.
Yeah, but I haven't talked that part. So I was closer. I thought the question was about the Fisher channel. So the question is about the relative consumption channel.
Inflation distribution.
Okay. No, but the inflation redistribution, you have in any case. So it's not about relative prices. Without relative prices, you also have inflation redistribution. Do we agree on that? I mean, this is the pure Fisher channel. I mean, Cesar have a couple of papers on that. Klaus have a paper on that. So you don't need to have relative change of prices in order to have inflation redistribution. You also have inflation redistribution with changes in price, in relative prices.
You
but
mean
you don't need that.
in goods?
Yes.
Well,
that's a Fisher channel. So now it's clear that even in economics, it's not entirely. So the Fisher channel is just about creditors to debtors. Relative prices don't need to change.
I'm talking about the inflation inequality channel.
Okay, so about inflation inequality.
Yeah.
So tell me. No, because I thought it was about the Fisher. So about inflation inequality?
Okay, so if inflation doesn't change relative prices, that effect that is, say, in period 1, that the price of books goes up by 20%, but the price of food stays at 0.
It cannot happen.
Or if it happens, it will be undone in 1 period or so. So any bank would be willing
No, it cannot happen. No, it's not that it will be undone. It cannot happen if there is no change in relative prices, then the price of books and the price of energy should increase the same.
Over some horizon, then even if you see it now happening, when people say, okay, so food increased a lot, so people who eat food is really enormously harmed by inflation. Well, are we talking about the relative price change or not the relative price change, right? That is why you are intertemporally partial equilibrium, not just partial equilibrium statically, but this kind of analysis is very intertemporally partial equilibrium.
I mean, we can talk about that later.
I'm a little bit concerned about our timetable. Because Galo has 5 more minutes. So can I suggest maybe that we give him a little bit of slack and let him get to his empirical results, and then we can come back to these questions after the discussion and during the break, which I think are important questions and interesting ones.
They are definitely, they are definitely important. No, don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm having a lot of fun getting the questions. So, let's talk about just to clarify, because I haven't talked about that. So, about the relative consumption channel, I mean, the nominal income channel is the one that is easier, even if it's important to get into account that the Fisher channel is a stock channel in a way, whereas the other is a flow channel, because one depends on the period. So depending on the period of reset of prices, this channel is going to be stronger or weaker. I mean, if you update wages every day, this channel, I mean, it's nothing. If you update them every 10 years, this is very high. Whereas the Fisher channel is a stock channel, so it has a different. It's not trivial, which is the period of comparison when you compare those. Here we are comparing a stock and a flow, so there is the period matters in this comparison, both for income and for consumption. And then let's talk about consumption. So as it's true, consumption depends on the ratio between your individual consumption and the average consumption. Again, if all prices move the same, as Martin was saying, this channel dies. Because no matter if your basket is different to that of the average consumption, if all prices increase in the same amount, your individual inflation is equal to the average inflation. So there is no channel whatsoever. So you need to have, over the period of comparison, which is what matters, because this is not an intertemporal analysis. This is just a static analysis over one period. So over that period, which is the period over which inflation is measured, you need to have changes in relative prices. Then in the future, you can have other changes in relative prices that will give rise to other movements in this channel, of course, that can undo or not the current situation. So then, coming back to the impact, if this person has an income of 30,000 euros, I mean, she's gonna have these 30,000 euros multiplied by 5% through the nominal income channel. So at the end of the day, you are going to have a combination of how those different channels affect your real wealth. Then from real wealth to welfare, there are many steps. I mean, first, and the question was made, the next step would be to move, as Claire does. I mean, I'm not aware of any of the papers in this literature are talking about welfare. But at least some of the papers, the few, talk about consumption. We didn't even dare to talk about consumption, because it's true that when you talk about consumption, you need to get into account the MPCs. And we couldn't say nothing new about MPCs. But of course, you can take all this, get into a model with MPCs, and then compute the impact of inflation on consumption of the people. I mean, but we didn't stick to that. So it was a much simpler approach. So what is the interpretation from a conceptual point of view of each of these channels? Given this surprise inflation, how much you should compensate or be compensated by a household such that the household is in the same financial situation, consuming the same consumption basket after the inflationary episode. That is the answer to the issue. So assuming that this person, the nominal income remains, the consumption basket remains, and you hold the same assets, how much you should compensate this person or be compensated to this person to be the same. Of course, in the real world, as you were saying, there are many compensation mechanisms. So all people, in some countries like in Spain, can get compensation through inflation in the pensions, or maybe an employee can give you a special bonus to compensate for inflation, or maybe your parents are giving you a new house. All these kind of things can happen, but they are not in the model. So we don't care about out of the model compensation mechanism in order to compensate people. We just want to know which is the fair amount that people should be compensated for the inflation. It is about fair amounts of compensation, yes?
But you're not allowing them to change their...
Can I just suggest that
we are not allowing, we are keeping we are looking at the actual consumption during the period.
Yeah, but you can't change wood prices, so like you are sort of...
Yes,
the effect is too hard.
We are not...
we need to really get going, Mike.
So let me devote the last 3 minutes to the empirical part. So we have these two surveys. One is the public survey. So we do the exercise twice. One is with public surveys. This is like the U.S. Consumer Expenditure Survey and like the Survey of Consumer Finance. So they are consumption and finance surveys for Spain that covers, one is 20,000 households and the other is 6,000 households. This is the first exercise that we do. Then we also use this proprietary BVA data that includes all granular information about credit and debit card payments, direct debit payments, irregular transfers. So we know the consumption of people. I mean, we don't know how much they expend their cash, but we know every expenditure that they make with their credit cards, that for consumption. So we know where they spend. And we impute that to the standard EU COICOP item. So we can construct the inflation based on these people. Then we also know all their financial position. There are a number of caveats to this about whether they are in different banks. So we originally have 4 million bank accounts, and we clean up to 1.6 million bank accounts in order to remove people who maybe their main bank is another bank, or they have a share account with their wives. I mean, so we really want people that is their true account, okay? Still 1.6 million. Then, coming back to César's question, why 2021? That is the increase in inflation in Spain in 2021 by components. So it was really, it was a huge surge in inflation, asymmetric across sectors. So here you can see across different, this is the increase in price across the different categories that compose the CPI, and then the weights using the official surveys, so the official data, and our robustness analysis using BBI data. They are similar, but by no means they are identical. Okay, so the average inflation with BBVA is lower. Instead of 6.6, which was the data, the official data, and the data in the surveys, because they coincide, it was 3.9. There were an important point answering the issue is that, was it anticipated? Was it expected to be temporary? You can answer this question by looking at both at market instrument and survey instruments. So you can look at inflation-linked swaps, at the survey of monetary analysis, survey of professional forecasting, before and during the episodes. And both before and during the episode, before the episode, no one was expecting inflation in 2021. And during the episode, even in September 2021, people was expected that inflation would have died by January. I mean, now it looks very funny when you think about that, but we thought that. So then, as I ran out of time, and I wanted to talk about the different position, but maybe my discussant will make a work about that. But just in order to understand the main results of the paper is this heterogeneous consumption channel is peanuts compared to the Fisher and nominal income channel. So the dispersion in consumption baskets is 1 order of magnitude less relevant than the traditional Fisher and nominal channels. That's the first issue. And second, about the winners and losers, it's not that difficult. If you are familiar, I mean, to you, that will not be a surprise, that high-income, middle-aged people are the main winners or the less losers because they are large nominal debtors, whereas old, poor people are the main losers. Why? Because they typically hold all their wealth in cash, they have pensions, and even their consumption channel is more relevant for them because they typically are the ones who consume more energy and food. So this is from the point of view of this redistributive point of income. This is the main result. And with that, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for the organizers for inviting me to discuss the paper, and I promise I'll try to be quick so that we can get to the other questions that were raised. Okay, so I think so. The main question that this paper tries to answer is how inflation impacts households' wealth, right? And so uses this approach similar to Auclair. So it's essentially it really focuses on the effects of an unexpected temporary change in inflation, and so it's really like it's a one-time thing, okay? And so there's these, and so as Galo was highlighting, there's these 3 main channels. So the first is a Fisher channel, which is essentially depends on the net nominal position of households, right? So it only depends on whether you're a net debtor or a net creditor, okay? And so because inflation will change the nominal, the value of your net position, right? And so if you're a net creditor, you're going to be hurt by inflation, and if you're a net debtor, inflation is going to reduce the value of your liabilities, and so you're going to gain from inflation. That is just the Fisher channel, which is, again, it's relatively standard. It's already been looked in the literature as well from like Dobke and Schneider. Like, this is not particularly new, the results. I mean, it's good to see it for Spain, in particular with this inflation experiment, but it was already there. And the same is true for the nominal income channel. Like, everybody has some nominal income, like think of like salaries, right? And so to the extent that these salaries are nominal and rigid, then inflation is going to change the value of those. Now, what is new in this paper is really the presence of this relative consumption channel. I'm going to talk about this in a second. Okay, and so what he finds, so the main results, he didn't have much time to go through these things, is that so the Fisher channel and the nominal income channel are the ones that are more important from a quantitative point of view. And so when it comes to the Fisher channel, essentially you have, as I was saying, that inflation hurts creditor and benefits debtors, okay? While the nominal, for when it comes to the nominal income channel, it hurts everybody, right? Now, it is a question, of course, of who is hurt the most. I'll have a comment about that. And on the other, and these 2 channels are kind of like on the same order of magnitude, while the relative consumption channel is much, much smaller than the other 2. Essentially, the fact that different households face different inflations doesn't seem to matter too much. Okay, so I think it was a very interesting paper. It was a very interesting read. In particular, I think there's one thing that is particularly useful is this use of the 2021 inflation episode, which, as Galo was mentioning, it was completely unexpected, and even in 2021 people were still expecting that to be entirely temporary. Like, if you've been on Twitter, you've seen the discussions on, like, between, I don't know, Summers and Krugman talking about this and arguing against it, and you really need this inflation to be unexpected and temporary for this sort of decomposition to make sense. Okay, so now I've talked a little bit about this. As I mentioned, the relative consumption channel is the new one, right? Is where the innovation is coming from this paper, and it's essentially the fact that so different households consume different baskets of goods, and so as the price of these goods change differently, then these households face different inflation rates, and so given, like if they want to keep consuming the same consumption basket, then this will influence their wealth. Okay. Now there is also like an issue of whether households will change their consumption basket to do that, as you were mentioning before. But again, because this is like a one-time event, right? You can look at the consumption basket that they're consuming today, and that is going to be the effect. Then, of course, there is going to be an intertemporal effect, but these are not in the paper. Okay. And so why does consumption matter so little? Okay, so essentially in the decomposition in the main equation that he showed, what you see is that the change in wealth depends on the ratio of individual inflation rate over the CPI inflation, right? -1. And so if everybody's inflation is very similar to the overall inflation, then that ratio is going to be close to 1, and that difference is going to be close to 0. Okay, and so this is exactly what I'm showing here, because we like 2x2 tables. So in both data sets, right? So the minimum of these orange value is -0.15, and its maximum is 0.24, right? So essentially, this is really like it really mutes these consumption effect. Okay, now some of it cannot be avoided. It's just what it is, right? It's just the fact that households' consumption baskets are not so different. However, I think part of it is also due to the kind of like the partitioning of the data. Essentially, what you guys are looking at is mostly like let's say bottom 25 and top 25% of income, for example, right? And so I think, so these are very broad groups. And I think in particular with the BBVA data, you could go much finer, and you could look at both income and wealth. And because wealth is more unequally distributed, I would expect these differences to be larger as well. So I think that there is some potential for these consumption channel to still bite in some parts of the distribution. Okay, but obviously, like, I don't know, will depend on what the data say. Okay.
Sorry, these
yes.
numbers were in percent, or they're just ratios?
These are just ratios.
So this is a minimum of -15% and +24%?
Yes. Yes.
These are big differences.
No, I know, but so what you're doing is you're multiplying C by 0.15, right? And by 0.24. So you're shrinking down the effect of consumption on wealth, right?
No, but it's what? It's 15% of 6% inflation.
Yes. Yes.
Compared to the fee share, I mean, fee share maybe you have 10,000. Your net nominal position is 10,000. Here you consume 4,000, and it's a 15% of 4,000. So I mean,
so it gets even smaller, exactly.
Very small.
Okay, so what are some? I had some other things that I think the paper could be extended for. So first of all, I mean, in order for that decomposition to work that way, you need to assume that all wages are perfectly rigid and nominal, right? Now, I think wage rigidity is usually different at different points of the distribution. So, for example, the middle class has more rigid wages than both the bottom and the top. Like I just learned yesterday, for example, that here in France, the minimum wage is indexed by inflation, right? So in that sense, that wouldn't work. I don't know how it is in Spain, but and it's also a matter of when it comes to this income, it's also a matter of how much it changes income along the intensive versus extensive margin. So, for example, Tobias has a paper in which they show that when it comes to monetary policy shocks, this produces an increase in the separation risk, right? So I think it would also be interesting to try and disentangle these effects as well. And then another question is that, so when it comes to the nominal income, right? So the nominal income channel, everybody is hurt by inflation because everybody's wages are devalued by it, right? However, like some households are going to be hurt more than others, and it's hard to see it from from the results. So I think in particular, this brings me to the next point, which is, so I think we also would like to see the effect on inequality itself. Right. So in the paper, you focus directly on the effect on wealth, right? But because you have this redistribution through both the nominal income channel and the Fisher channel, right? Well, then what is the total effect on inequality, right? And so in that sense, even the nominal income channel, although it hurts everybody, it might have a redistributive effect. And then I think there is another question which came up a little bit. Now, I'm sympathetic to it because I care about wealth and wealth inequality by itself. But in general, like usually we care about wealth in that it affects consumption, and so today's consumption and future consumption. So I think this is something that needs to come out better from the paper as well. And then I mentioned this already, so I'm closing in here. I think it would also be useful to separate these results with respect to wealth as opposed to income. Also because, as I was mentioning, because the distribution of wealth is going to be more unequal, then we should also expect larger differences, and so maybe we have a better idea of the numbers. Okay, thank you.
There were plenty of questions throughout the talk, but maybe we can collect a couple and then we give Galo the opportunity to respond.
Sorry, I was regarding the consumption channel. So you are missing the cash people, right? And I think in the table you show there where you fail with the consumption shares, and you see there is food and there is other items that probably are cash based people, because you have this all, institutionalized people in the financial system. I wonder if you can be, probably those are the ones that they are going to be hurt the most by the consumption channel. And you don't have them. So I don't know if you can use that information from the average consumption shares and the ones that you have, maybe to put an upper bound or a lower bound on that, on what you're missing, right?
Nuño, I understand your point that wealth is interesting, independent of lifelong consumption or welfare, etc. But I was wondering whether it does not bias your result, or saying that relative consumption is peanuts. So, silly example, imagine I consume only whiskey and the price of whiskey doubles, and then I'm going to say, it really sucks, I'm poor. It seems that your decomposition is going to say, well, look at your wealth, it didn't increase much, but I can still say, well, sure, but my wealth, I cannot spend it on whiskey as much, and my future income will be also affected. So doesn't it matter what you look at?
I want to make another case, another example of what this analysis would be useful for. And I think that you kept saying this is an unexpected shock, or Claire analyzes an unexpected shock. Claire analyzes what is called an MIT shock. An MIT shock is not an unexpected shock. An MIT shock is a shock with measure 0. That is to say, it's a shock that happens, but had probability 0. It's very different from a shock that is unexpected. Because suppose that this inflation of 8% comes from a process in which every period there is a 0.01 probability that the coin will be flipped, and with probability 1/2, inflation would be 8%, and with probability 1/2, it would be minus 8%. Now, if you say, okay, I take a mortgage, so I'm a rich guy who is a debtor, I take a mortgage, that mortgage is going to take into account the uncertainty of the 8% minus 8%. So maybe instead of being the mortgage rate 4%, which would be in the case without uncertainty, it would be 4.01%. And I would be paying that for 30 years. And then when the 8% inflation comes, you say, oh, I was a debtor, so I was benefited because I had an 8% deflation of my debt. Well, but I was paying 4.01 for 30 years. So maybe in terms of welfare, I'm washed out. Now, if instead of that, the 8% is really a black swan, it's a zero measure shock, there I do have a welfare gain. So I think the language of saying unexpected versus MIT shock is fundamentally relevant in terms of welfare. That is to say, we cannot make statements of saying the rich people benefit because they are debtors and it was unexpected. Well, maybe they were paying that for 25 years, the possibility of an unexpected shock.
Galo, you want to respond?
So let me discuss first, respond first to the discussant, to Riccardo, who was, I think it was, to me at least, maybe not to you, but to me was a great discussion, quite useful. I agree. First, you summarized quite well the paper, better than I did, which is good in these circumstances. Second, I totally agree with the points that and you have pointed out the direction that I think we are going to follow. So first is the issue of wealth, looking at wealth, increasing that. Computing the Gini, you are right. It would be nice to see which is the impact of that on inequality, on wealth inequality. So I totally agree. And the issue of wages. That was the direction. That was the thing that you have suggested. That was the only one that we had already in the pipeline. The issue of getting the distribution of, actually because it was suggested by Hervé some months ago, to compute the hazard rates and try to do a more fine analysis that assume that everyone updates every year, but assuming maybe this guy updates every year, but this guy updates every 6 months. So that thank you very much, because all the suggestions, but the wealth suggestion, we haven't thought, it was very obvious, but we haven't thought about that, and it's very good. Then about Facundo's question related to cash people, you are right and wrong in the sense that for the BBVA data, it is the case that we don't have the cash people, and then we try to do what you suggest. We impute so we know how much money they get from the ATM, and we try to impute it according to some estimation based on that. For the surveys, for the expenditure surveys, people report. You can believe it or not, but people report their expenditure in cash and in credit card. So some of the analysis was, and then actually the difference between BBVA and because for the surveys, there is not that much consumption inequality, but for BBVA there is no consumption inequality whatsoever, and we think that is precisely because of the cash. So that was we have devoted a lot of time to this issue, and it's very important. Stefan has the issue that you are totally right from the point of view of welfare. So, and this is something that we do not mention, and I think it's very important to mention. You are totally right that maybe we are overstepping over ourselves, because it's true that you can say that you consume a lot of whiskey. Now, if prices increase, you have to consume. That has a small impact on your wealth, but it might have a huge impact on your welfare, because if you just want to consume whiskey, it's not the same to say, yeah, man, come on. But so that's a point that we should make. We cannot do anything about that, but we should at least mention. Then about Martin's point about, I think that maybe the confusion is about which Auclair paper. So Auclair job market paper 2019 has no model. There are no MIT shocks, because it has no model whatsoever. It's an empirical. There was the original version of the model. He has an MIT shock in some part. It was removed by the referees. So the paper published in the American Economic Review has no MIT shocks because it has no model. So it's just exactly, literally, word by word, what we do. So there is no. So the point that you make is totally true. It links to the point of César about expected, unexpected inflation and the whole path of inflation. So you are right, but it does not apply to Auclair's or to ours because it is not there. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Galo.